Tonight on Revolutionaries.
There was a product that was going to cross the search and ads boundary. And halfway through the meeting, one of the engineers, whose name was Ron, basically took his fist and went wham and said, "That's evil." And the whole conversation stopped. And I said, "Oh my God." And so after a lengthy hour of debate, it was agreed to not move forward.
The book, How Google Works, goes behind the scenes of one of the world's most revolutionary companies. We get an inside look tonight from authors Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg in conversation with former Googler Marissa Mayer, now CEO of Yahoo. Major funding for Revolutionaries is provided by the Intel Corporation.
So, about the book, how did you decide to write it? What was the process like? What inspired you?
You built half of this stuff. Why are you asking the questions? You know
because
the
you
answers
wrote the book.
but you invented it, right?
Well, I used to come back from Eric's staff meetings and I would get bored. So I would write down rules that people came up with when they said things that were insightful, because if I had all the rules, like repetition doesn't spoil the prayer, bank goodwill for a rainy day, when we got into an argument about something, I could get everybody to move along more expeditiously and go on to the next point. And then I would come to my staff and explain all of the rules. So in 2009, our head of sales said, we should pass all of this tribal wisdom on to Googlers. And so I wrote a speech, which you helped me with, notes for the bestseller I'll never publish. People liked it.
Jonathan, you're so wrong. One, it is a bestseller, and two, we did publish it.
You're right.
Marissa, why are you not a co-author? Anyway,
So,
you left. That's the reason.
But it is a bestseller. So tell us about the reception. So you're in like week 3 of the book tour. What surprised you about what people have taken from the book? How it's been received?
Well, people are very hungry for new ideas. And as you know, because again, you did a lot of the credit, I think along the way over the decade, Google pioneered a whole new set of principles of managing things. And whether it's the way we recruited people or the way we made decisions, which was sort of rather bizarre, as you know, it worked. And it worked remarkably well. And of course, the reason we wrote the book is because we all benefit, I think, by making American companies stronger, creating more innovators, trying this new model. I was concerned that there's a gap, there's sort of a huge gap between the world that we all live in, right, and then the normal companies. And that there's this whole generation of people coming out for which the normal companies, the traditional hierarchical companies, are just not designed. It just doesn't make sense to them. And they're very smart, very global, very quick, and they walk into these very hierarchical companies with very, very turgid management systems.
That makes sense to me. It's funny, reading the book, I felt like for me, there's so many things in there that are just values I hold dear that I was like, wait, I can't, I think I was sort of almost going to say to my husband, to my family, to people I work with, if you want to understand me and some of my values, read the book, because I think that there's just so much in there that defines a culture. One of the things that defines that culture is the hiring of great people. So what do you look for when you hire? How important is hiring?
Yeah, I think, hiring is everything that you do. And we had a set of attributes which you helped us create: role-related knowledge, basic cognitive ability. But I think the main thing that we did that was different was we really looked for passion, and we looked for generalists, not specialists. And I think the biggest thing that I learned in the first year was that technology was changing so quickly that if you put a specialist into a role, they're going to look at that role based on their specialty. If you put a generalist and a learning animal into that role, they're going to have the pliancy to roll with the punches and be able to deal with change. The other thing that was fundamentally different was the way we hired with committees, which I couldn't stand at the beginning, and you and Urs and others were largely responsible for.
And you were ultimately in charge of this process.
I was. I couldn't hire my friends, which was a real problem, because I wanted to hire lots more people like me, and you wouldn't let me.
Actually, it's important you tell the story, right? That you actually complained about this?
About the hiring.
He complained about not being able to hire his friends.
I did.
And what happened was Marissa said, you should hire people more like Marissa.
She did. And in fact,
which we did. And it was the right strategy. Do you remember this?
Vaguely, it was, yeah.
I remember it quite well.
and she created this crazy rating system.
Go ahead.
We rated people on a scale of 1 to 4, which seemed easy to me. 1 is bad and 4 is good. That's how I remembered it. Then she explained to me that no, 4 meant this person is so good, dear committee, that if you have the audacity to turn them down, you need to call me out of whatever I'm doing so that I can come into the room and fight to make sure we bring this person into my company. And 1 was the opposite. Call me, this person is so bad, I don't want this person in our company. And that was how we ended up rating people for committees.
Yeah, the idea was that you took convincer or convincee roles, where you convincer positive, convincer negative, or convincee positive or negative. And
that is such a Marissa statement. Now you understand how it actually worked at Google. She would sort of make these things, I'd try to follow her logic.
And
so along the way,
go ahead.
her actual most, let's take control of this. Her most important accomplishment of her many at Google was that one day she decided that we actually had to rethink the way product management worked. And at the time, there were 3 product managers who now run large parts of the company or a large other company. Separate discussion. And so the question was, how do we build that model in a scalable way? And so Marissa had the idea that we should hire people who had technical backgrounds but who did not want to be programmers. And she called these the APMs. And so her idea was we would take these people, and they're very, very young, right? You know, right out of college, green, never worked in a company, you know, sort of eager to do everything. And so she built it. And if you look at that group, almost all of the interesting startups in the Valley are headed by those people, and the major product lines within Google are headed by those people. So the model worked brilliantly.
But so talk about smart creatives.
Sure.
Why are smart creatives so important? What do they bring to a culture?
So smart creatives are people who are highly technical. They're also business savvy, and they're creative. And they're passionately curious. They're the kind of people who don't take no for an answer. They're the kind of people who today can build a demo out of the tools that we have off the shelf that are easy to produce things with, and they show you as opposed to tell you what you're going to do. So you don't need to actually create rigid product plans. You can actually create demos and prototypes and test them and then see where they go.
And by the way, one of the things that we sort of figured out in the writing of this book is that almost all of the traditional business discussion is around scarcity. How do you manage your marketing? How do you manage your channels and so forth? But the internet has upended all of that. Now there's a global support source of funds for any expansion you have. The internet allows you to distribute and brand yourself in pretty much any way. New brands are popping off all the time. Think Uber as an example. So what are you left with? You have to build phenomenal products. So if you don't have an over allocation, if you will, of these smart creatives, you're not going to be competitive in such a hyper-competitive world, which is why the whole recruiting tack, the kind of people you hire, and the focus on culture are so important going forward. And I would argue further that this is true, obviously, for the tech industry, because it's now been largely copied by every company here, but it's actually true for non-tech companies as well.
And we touched a little bit on the interview scale before, but one of the claims in the book is that interviewing is the most important skill for any business leader.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, I would often in our staff's meetings tell managers, you know, you are the sum of what your people produce. And I find it interesting that managers in most companies don't spend the amount of time with recruiting that they should. If you look at the coach of a sports team, they seem to get it, right? The players that they draft onto their team are really all that matters. And I think we lose sight of that, and we delegate recruiting to recruiters. And as soon as you delegate recruiting to recruiters, then you go in a downward spiral. You want to make sure all of the individual employees are focused on recruiting. Larry used to tell us when you and I were upset that we couldn't meet the hiring quotas and hire as quickly as we could, that we could just double every quarter if every single person hired one person. His math was correct.
And as it always was. we did lots of interesting things that are not non-traditional, but one of the more controversial ones was the reliance on what were called hiring committees. And these hiring committees would make the hiring decision, and the manager was often not on the committee, and often the subject did not know what job they were going to work on. So it was modeled very much after how successful universities hire, because hiring is critical in universities. And ultimately, Jonathan and Shona and David actually ran a whole process that Marissa helped design. It produced this sort of ruthless efficiency around the quality of the people. And we were heavily criticized for these sort of hiring decisions. But again, if you look over the arc of a decade, it was one of the most important things, if not the most important thing we did, because it gave us a workforce that was intellectually flexible for the challenges that the corporation faces.
We also had the one saying that Marissa learned from the sales guy, which we like, Tim Armstrong. You don't want to allow the invasion of the bozos. And what was very clear is that A's can be taught to hire A's, but B's will never hire A's. B's will hire C's because they're afraid of people that are better than they are. So you really create a positive effect if you manage to limit the company to just hiring A's and then teach them how to interview, teach them how to hire. You avoid the invasion of the bozos.
So, assuming the opposite of the bozos are great people, how do you make sure that the great people, the smart creatives, stay successful and happy?
Well, many people who visit Google think it's because of the lava lamps, the balls, the free food.
I like that stuff.
The on-site doctors, the number of benefits. But there's a secret. And the secret is the best people want to work on what they want to work on, and they want to work on things that they care a lot about, and they want to be allowed to be successful. And if you can build a culture which empowers them to do that, you will retain them. If you micromanage them, if you don't give them the resources they need in this competitive world of labor, they'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think you can't tell the people how to think, but you can manage the environment in which they think. You can be transparent with information. You can run meetings in a way that allows everybody to participate. And you can do what we call in the book, limit the hippos. Hippo is what we call...
Jonathan, please define hippo for our audience.
Highest paid person's opinion.
Highest paid...
H-I-P-P-O.
A hippo.
Hippo. You want to
limit... The most
limit...
dangerous animal in the savannah.
They live actually in the water, Eric.
Sorry.
Yeah. But they do kill more people in Africa, and they kill more good ideas in companies. And one of the rules that we had, which I only figured out late in my tenure at Google, because I was always trying to get Larry and Sergey to let me move to the model I had at Excite at Home, where I only had 3 people working for me. It would have been so easy if it was just you and Susan and Salar. But instead, I always had like 12 or 15 people working for me, and I would try to reorg. And Larry would say, "You can't reorg that way." No. And then one day I was in a meeting, and there was an engineering manager who wanted to do the same thing. And Larry said, "Oh, we can't let him do that. He'll be a hippo. If you have too many people working for you, you can't possibly micromanage them."
What is the number in your case, Jonathan?
The number is 7.
Okay.
And if I had 8 Marissas working for me, I could conquer the world.
You talk about in the book being overworked in a good way, happily overworked. Tell us a little bit about that. I think that it was always something that was present at Google, that there was always way more work than people. How do you bring that into a culture and make that a positive thing?
Well, we've actually been criticized over this sort of general term because it doesn't sound right, but let's explain what we mean. The kind of people who we want to have working in our company and you want to have working in your company are people who are going to do this because they love it. And they work more or less all the time as best they can when they're not doing things that they also enjoy, like being with their family, raising their kids, going to the movies or what have you. In other words, they're intense people. So when we say overworked in a good way, that's the context that we mean it in. If you believe that the work should be 9 to 5 with a half-an-hour lunch break, then you should work for the government, right? And by the way, that's a fine job, but that's not the kind of person that we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who wakes up in the morning and just can't wait to solve some new, interesting, and hard problem whether it's in sales, whether it's in policy, whether it's in legal, whether it's in management, so forth. People who delight in that things. And it's so much easier to manage such people. We learned this, Larry Sergey and I went to visit Warren Buffett, and he had a huge empire, $100 billion empire, and he had 14 employees. This is like, the highest ratio of leverage of individuals ever assembled. And he explained that he only bought companies where the leadership would stay in place, and they were going to do it whether he bought them or not. So he never worried about it. He just called them and talked to them, and it worked. And at Google, the key aspect of this sort of competition over resources was that the people are just dying to drive harder, to make things happen, because they care passionately about it. It makes it much easier to decide where the priorities are and so forth. You don't have to sit there and worry that somebody's off the reservation.
Well, on a related note, you have this colorful metaphor in the book of knaves and divas. So, Jonathan, do you want to talk to us about knaves and divas?
Did you write that?
No, Jonathan.
Did I write that?
No, you did not. You've been taking credit for this. The credit goes to Alan, our co-author.
Alan's here.
Is Alan here? There he is.
Exile knaves, fight for divas.
So can you explain?
Can I explain what Alan meant? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
Yes.
Jonathan.
So typically we find that the most successful teams are relatively small. Engineering teams in small groups of 3 or 4. And one of the things that you find when you have small groups is you kind of get a dynamic of some built-in social controls. People help modify bad behavior in a small group. So the worst thing that can happen is you allow a knave into the midst of a good small team. So what's a knave? A knave is someone who lies, cheats, steals, takes credit for somebody else's work, spills coffee in the kitchen and doesn't pick it up. You want to help the teams exile these knaves and get rid of them. Because if you get to a tipping point in knave density, nobody wants to come to work
This is another
anymore.
Jonathan phrase. Knave density?
Knave density. I learned this
Did you learn this from
Marissa. I learned
I
all
did not
sorts
know.
of
I learned about the
statistical-
knaves and the divas in the book. I understand the concept of them, but that was new.
So it's a density field of
analogy.
knaves, and you want to minimize the number of knaves.
Minimize knaves and help the divas. What's a diva? A diva is a brilliant person who believes that everything should be done in an exceptional way and is often dictatorial, difficult to work with, but has great vision and has a better notion of where the world is going and what they're doing with their product than anybody else. In these small environments, the teams can drive out those people. So you need to exile the knaves and fight for the divas.
And the reason you need the divas, aside from just sort of entertainment value in the culture, is these are the people who drive the culture forward. These are the people who say that's not good enough. These are the people who drive the average human, because not everyone's going to be a diva, as many as you try to find them, push them all to fight harder. And often, these are the people who ultimately become the most famous in our industry. You can argue, for example, Steve Jobs, right, a brilliant, brilliant product manager, diva-esque, right, very driven, very strong, right? Look at the impact of people like that. We need them. Don't drive them out.
I talked in my opening about your thoughts on scale. So I've never seen anyone manage scale as effectively. To take Google from 200 people when you joined to today 50,000. And I think the most remarkable thing, and I'll ask you to tell some of the stories and then more broadly how you scale culture. But there's this interesting thing that happened when you arrived, which is we were 200 people, we had way too much work, and Eric came in and he saw our annual plan and we said, well, we're going to double. Under Larry's doubling principle, we're going to go to 400 people this year. And Eric said, no, 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 no. Like, we're going to have 50 people hired between now and the end of the year. So basically, he took our hiring plan down and cut it to a fourth of what we had hoped. And we were like, who's going to do all this work? You created these little laminated cards called Larry's and Sergey's, and every time you tried to hire someone, you had to turn in one of the 50 laminated, numbered cards with Larry's and Sergey's on them. They looked like little dollar bills with the founders' faces in them.
I made those at home with my laminator.
They were very impressive, and then they created this whole black market for the Larry's and Sergey's, because you'd have like the sales guys would need something built, and they'd be like, I can give you a Larry and Sergey, you can hire that engineer. So, talk a little bit about what made you do it, because I think it was really, when I look back at the way we scaled, there were some points when we could grow really fast. There were some points when it was really important for us not to grow that fast. And I think that was one of the most critical moments where you came in, because I think if we had tried to double the company that year, we would have probably messed everything up.
Yeah.
And then it was that commitment to quality and pacing that was so important.
So if you talk to an engineering team, every engineering team needs twice as many engineers as it has now, right now. I assume people in the audience are living this, right? This is normal. And there's a rate at which an organization can hire at quality. And you can eyeball it. And in our case, it was the calculation. I looked at the hiring rate and I said, we're going to hire 50 people, right? And again, we can try to hire more, but realistically, we're going to try to hire 50 people. So let's do it with a quality measure. And so the Larry and Sergey cards were a simple way of putting in a management technique, which ultimately became quite rigorous with respect to finances. The reason we couldn't use our financial system is we were using QuickBooks. And we had a 5-user license, which was the maximum on a single PC, and it was overloaded, and it took too long to get the QuickBooks reports. And that is really true. So my position on the company was we needed to build a management team that could scale. And I'm a strong believer that you can systematically innovate. In other words, innovation is not something that you do randomly. It's a culture, it's a way of hiring, it's a way of thinking, and so forth. So what would happen is we would sort of figure out our growth plan, and then I would ask Larry and Sergey, how much bigger will we be? And what they would do is they would take the current growth rate and they would just extrapolate it. And one day they were rollerblading, and they rollerbladed over to the SGI campus, and they came back and they said, we're going to need that campus. And now today we're in the former SGI campus. Et cetera. So if you take a look at the growth rates, you can actually plot it. One of the things we talk about in the book is that companies don't really have long-term plans. They have plans in the next year. And so ultimately, you need a 5-year plan. So ultimately, what happened was you and a set of other people said, these are the growth rates, this is the hiring plan, and off we go.
And I think that what was really interesting through that period is the way we were able to scale the culture. Because around the same time that Jonathan joined in 2002, there was this notion, I remember you really put a fine point on it, where you said, we're a one-building company and a one-building culture, and it's not going to work.
That's right.
If we are spread across multiple buildings. I remember that really scaring me, because I was like, wait, given how we're growing, given that we're down to 80 square feet per person, which is really tight in common areas, yeah. I was like, hang on, how are we going to get our culture to scale? So what were some of the insights you guys developed over the time in terms of how to scale the culture?
I think that at the outset, Google had a mission that was very clear, and it created a selection bias early on so that we got people that really believed in that same mission. And when we wrote it down, it was actually the smart creatives, the founding people who had the vision that wrote these things down. Most companies kind of do the opposite. They get started, and then they have a little bit of success, and so then they can hire in some HR person or some PR person, and the person comes in and says, well, I'll write the culture out. And this person wouldn't know the culture if it jumped up and bit him. So they'll produce something like, to build unrivaled partnerships with our customers through the dedication, hard work, perseverance of our wonderful employees to generate shareholder value.
So that was, let's see.
Which, by the way, I was in that meeting.
That was,
it's what gave birth to Don't Be Evil. Yeah.
No, the one you just quoted was from Enron, right?
Enron was respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. This one was Lehman Brothers.
By the way, the Don't Be Evil was interesting, and I don't know if you were in the meeting where I first saw this. Not when you invented it, but when I first encountered it. So somebody explained to me that we were doing Don't Be Evil. It probably was you, and I thought this is like some stupid marketing phrase, because I'd never actually seen marketing phrases inside of a company be effective. So we're sitting in the old conference room, and you'll remember in 2400, and sitting at the end, and it's a team, and my guess is you were there. And there was a conversation about search and ads, and there was a product that was going to cross the search and ads boundary. And halfway through the meeting, one of the engineers, whose name was Ron, basically took his fist and went wham and said, "That's evil." And the whole conversation stopped. And I said, "Oh my God." And so after a lengthy hour of debate, it was agreed to not move forward. So all of a sudden I understood that, one, the company was actually serious about this, and it gave this particular engineer a sort of a moral question to ask to help guide his or her, in this case a guy, his actions.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many amazing don't be evil stories. My favorite was in that kind of HRS culture meeting when we first put it out there. We were like going through brainstorming all this. They pulled a bunch of old timers together. They were working towards 10 values, and someone demanded that we put don't be evil in as like, I think, number 6. And someone said, well, you can't have a negative corporate value. Can you reframe it positively? And we were like,
only
do good.
Only
like,
be non-evil.
We were like, yeah, do good. It's just it's not as catchy as don't be evil.
Well, we had other ones like you can have fun without wearing a suit.
Yes.
Things like
yeah.
that.
And Marissa and the first one was focus on
the user.
Focus on the user. And I think one of the things that helped, and it's worth, and we talk a lot about this in the book, is that when you have a framing principle like that, it helps you a lot. When you look at the challenges the corporation faces today, we ultimately retreat, I think successfully, into if we're doing it for the end user, we can get through anything.
So we've talked a lot about people and culture, but obviously one of the most important things that companies build are products and services. And you talk in the book about how important it is that basically every great product has a key technical insight. Mm-hmm. Why is that so important? How do you define technical insight?
So a technical insight is the kind of thing that could end up in a journal article. It's the kind of thing that typically a researcher, a scientist is going to come up with. If you think about Google and you make a list of all of our great products, there's a technical insight behind them. So why is search so great? PageRank. Why are ads so great? Price times click-through rate, the notion of quality of the ads. Why is Chrome so great? It's secure and it's fast. Why is Maps so great? I think actually you said that one because it's a virtual mirror of the world, right? And if you look at other products, you look at Salesforce.com, they realized that you could use the cloud for contact and relationship management, or Pixar, you can tell stories with computers. The great products, when technology is changing very quickly, leverage some insight about how technology works to usurp an existing set of products that make the product better by a factor of 10.
Right, and a current example for the audience has to do with cloud computing. The fact of the matter is that these smartphones are where all the apps are, and that's all the excitement is, but these are well enough connected now that you can be connected to a server bank that can do incredibly powerful calculations, speech recognition, those things off phone, and send the answer back fast enough, the user thinks that the phone did it. But in fact, there's a supercomputer, literally 1 million computers that helped answer this question, right? That's another example of a technical insight.
Looking a little bit to the future, what are some of the technical insights that aren't being capitalized on today? What are some of the things, some of the trends that you see that you think are going to define products, services 5 years out? And what are the technical insights and trends that are appearing today that can drive that?
I think the one that is the most profound is the development of a new category of artificial intelligence. And you say, I don't really use AI. You do it every day. And you do it in the kinds of search rankings that Google does. You do it in any form of voice recognition. All of those use incredibly sophisticated algorithms that, again, are often server-based to do this. We're very close to being able to do highly accurate speech recognition, image recognition, and text recognition. And it means that we'll begin to start learning really profound things. Now you say, well, what is that useful for? Imagine an assistant that helps you figure out, do you have to get up now? Can you stay asleep? You want to sort of, is your plane going to be late? Do I need to go to the dentist? Did I forget? Those sorts of things. All the things that are annoyances to the average person's life that a computer can help you with. So where are we with that? 2 years ago, Google built a neural network, which is a form of this AI, with no programming in it whatsoever. And not thinking what else to do, we had the neural network start to watch YouTube. And it watched 11,000 hours of YouTube. What did it discover? 2 things. It discovered the human face, eyes, nose, and mouth. And it discovered cats. Now, and I mean the whole concept of a cat. The tail, the running around, the furriness, the purring, all that kind of stuff. Now, I wish I could report to you that this seminal moment in the history of humanity, we had discovered Aristotle or Plato or something like that. But that's what we discovered. And there's a lot of evidence that that will now establish a very broad set of new applications, and not just in what we do, but also in medicine and so forth.
I think probably the biggest and most exciting ones are in healthcare. There's certainly lots of opportunities in terms of genetic research and data and designer drugs. But I think the other really exciting thing is just this notion of wearable devices and longitudinally being able to track information about physiological information that you get about people. And today we're just sort of seeing these nascent, Fitbit type devices and staying fit types of things. But that's all going to move to really measuring things about you that matter, right? You could give information for an at-risk teenager from their cell phone to a psychologist, and it's going to tell you a lot more about the state of that kid's depression or anxiety than when you ask a teenager how they're doing and they sort of give you some monosyllabic, oh, type of answer. Imagine, with your permission and all that stuff, what a phone could do in that kind of situation. And there are all sorts of other potential opportunities with anything that you can track longitudinally over large numbers of people.
I'm going to open it up to the audience questions in just a minute, but I have a few more. The buzzword of the day is millennials. And I think that one of the interesting things to think about in the context of how Google works is the products you just talked about are going to be used in the future by millennials. How do you think their expectations about products, technology are going to shape things? How are they going to interact in a way that's different than the way we would? And then I'm also going to ask the question about how will they be in the workforce, and how you think how Google works.
Well, it's useful to define. My observations of millennials consist of the following. What do millennials do? Text, 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 text. Picture of themselves, text, text, text. Picture of their friends, text, 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 text. Picture of the food they're eating. Occasionally they use important and powerful apps and they change the world. So what do you learn from this? You learn that they're highly, highly interactive. They're highly verbal in a text way, right? They're communicating all the time. And they're very much savvier than I was at that age. The amounts of information sources, whether they be traditional sources or fun sources or social, they're on supercharge all the time. And my guess is that this will be true of teenagers and younger people now, because frankly, if you have a child, your child is online all the time. And if they wake up at night, they're online when they wake up, and they go back on, and then they go back to sleep.
Jonathan, thoughts?
Clearly, Eric is more insightful about the state of millennials than I could ever hope to be. I would ask the APMs who you hired for me, as opposed to go in and tell them how to develop products for these millennials. I think we're certainly seeing a big transition to apps on mobile devices. I have not yet figured out what their preferred form of communication is. I just wrote a book with Eric, or Alan did, and we wrote our rules of email, and near as I can tell, they don't answer my emails. So I've yet to figure out what the best way to communicate with them.
But I think that generation views email as sort of their parents' activity. And I think there's clearly a new hyperactive form of communication that will emerge out of this, because these are communication-centric people. And what's interesting is if you look at how does news spread among that generation? It's link to link to link. This is an interesting story, take a look at this, and so forth. The majority of YouTube viewing, by the way, is from people watching links that other people send to them and that they encounter on social networks and Yahoo and Facebook and so forth.
Cool. Okay, so in the spirit, one of the things that always happens at Google is there's a big Q&A session at the end when anyone can ask a question. So we've got our questions from the audience. We'll try and go through them rapid fire so everyone gets a chance to ask their question. The first question is, what opportunities are there for Google in the sharing economy?
Well, we're a big investor in Uber to start with.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it depends on where our future products end up. It's one of the sort of discussions that people have had about the self-driving cars is that perhaps in the future, self-driving cars themselves will be shared. And they'll literally show up, you'll get in it, in an Uber-like model, you'll get out of it, it'll go and pick up someone else. So we have the opportunity with these new technologies to really rethink the ownership model. One of the more interesting statistics about cities is that 9% of the urban landscape is devoted to parking. Right. So imagine if you could get that back somehow, the impact in terms of ability to build buildings, getting people closer together, the strength of the cities.
I think our role is really probably in the middle, because what Google does is help reduce information costs, and with payments, if we can also help people reduce transactions costs, then any asset in the sharing economy that at any moment is going to go fallow, we can get the synapse firing between the person who can sell that asset and the person who might want to buy that asset. And that can apply to Airbnb type assets or any other good or service. It could be your car sitting idle. It could be your home. It could be the dress that you wore this week that you're not going to wear again next week.
In fact, one of the most important things that Google and other companies are trying to do is make the entire business transaction friction-free. Literally, the moment you want it, we get it to you, and boom. That velocity, increasing the velocity of that transaction, benefits the entire ecosystems of payers and credit card processors, obviously the advertiser, obviously the ultimate manufacturer, and hopefully the consumer.
Very cool. Next question is, are there any aspects of Google's culture when you look back you wish had been different, or that you would do differently the next time around?
Well, for me, I think all of the errors that we've made, the core error was in taking too long to do something or allowing something to go on for too long. You'll remember Wave, right? A team of ours brought out Wave, sounded like a great idea to me. I more or less understood it. I thought it was really neat. We launch it. Every month, the traffic goes down and down and down. But I was sort of attached to the product. And we kept trying things, and the traffic kept going down and down and down. And the way to understand that is that during that time while it was going down, the real opportunity cost was taking that team and not putting it on something which is more likely to go straight up. So businesses are not, the highest cost, and Sergey used to say this, the highest cost of our business, which I thought was taxes, by the way, mathematically, is opportunity cost.
Cool. Going back to smart creatives, how do you tell the smart creatives from the crazy ones?
Well, I tend to interview for passion, so I actually get them off talking about the things that they've rehearsed and get them on to talking about the things that they're passionate about. And I think that's when you kind of see people let their guard down, and the farther they go in the interview and the more they tell you, the crazier they are, the more likely they're to be a diva-like personality, and the better. I would rather err on the side of bringing in more of the people that are actually crazy and then having to figure out how to manage them than err on the side of not allowing some of those crazy people in the door.
Can a Googler be highly successful and have time and energy left over for a family?
You?
Yes. We have a number of Googlers here on the stage who managed to do that.
And we also have a lot of our family members.
And a lot of our family members are here. I think the most important thing to say is that it's easier if we sort of net it out, is that think about diversity and think about trying to get the very best people. And think about trying to have professional women who are, of course, fantastically talented people. You've got to solve the childcare problem. And you've got to solve it in a way that works for them. So after a lengthy conversation, we ultimately decided to purchase 3 closed schools, and we created 3 slightly different daycare centers, and again, the employees had a copay and so forth. That's an example of the kind of stuff you have to do. You have to solve the problem on their terms. I'm just using that as a specific example, but one that everyone can understand. You've got to find a way. We talk in the book about how, as sort of, middle-aged white men, we would notice that the women that we worked with would disappear for a few hours, right? Presumably taking care of the kids or whatever they were up to, and then they would come back afterwards, late at night, working very, very, very hard and late into the night, and obviously by their choice. And you got to find a way to let them get both done. So we learned, don't encroach on that time. You're encroaching on their family time, which is just as important, if not more important, than time with Eric and Jonathan.
This question says, I think startups in Silicon Valley are crazy again at this point. Do you think they're overvalued? And if I'm a CEO of a startup, should I keep hiring aggressively now, or should I secure funding and spend it more wisely, slowly and carefully over time?
Well,
True question, word for word.
You always want to spend money wisely, but I think the question is really asking, so are we in kind of a tech bubble? I actually think the answer is no. I used to circulate regularly Mary Meeker's slides. She's at Kleiner Perkins. She was at Morgan Stanley before. And if you go back and look at the bubble in 2000, and the NASDAQ's still lower than it was.
It's important to know that NASDAQ is not quite
2000.
at the bubble level of 2000.
But look,
bring it back, by the way. Those were great times.
But go to those slides, and just as a proxy for the value of the set of these companies, look at e-commerce. The amount of e-commerce has grown enormously, and we are moving to this model, which Eric mentioned earlier, of eliminating friction. If you eliminate friction between people, it's seamless to create a transaction. The combinations and permutations of transactions that you're going to get go through the roof exponentially. And I think the other thing you need to add into that equation is cell phones are getting much cheaper. We've got 2.5 billion new people in the next 5 years from all corners of the globe that are going to join the online medium and are going to be able to access information on the internet, access healthcare information, and engage in commerce. So the number of opportunities that we have are huge, and e-commerce is already far greater than it was at the beginning of the
So the reason it feels like a bubble is because what happened was the mezzanine rounds in the financing hierarchy of venture all of a sudden went way up, and they went up because these companies had a product and you could see a path to monetization over 1 billion people. So all of a sudden, if you have a successful product, you have a much greater likelihood of success. So to answer the second part of the question, it depends on where you are in the sort of company stage. If you're still building your technical team, you want to be careful to hire very carefully, very high quality people, work very, very hard, classic startup model. If you have revenue, right, you want to be careful to understand what the revenue growth rate is. And so depending on whether you have revenue or not, you get a different answer.
Very cool. The next question is, would the management principles that worked at Google, culture, hiring, decision-making, work for other startups in other places and other cultures?
I would argue, first place, the principles that we talk about in the book will work very well in any tech startup anywhere in the world. I think that's quite clear. And I say this with conviction because many of them have copied all of this, right? Because many of the people came from our culture, you know, et cetera. So to me, the question is, it's clearly correct for tech. What happens for existing companies? Now here they are regulated in a different way, they have different problems. How would you attack it? Well, the first question is, look at their hiring. It turns out that large existing companies will hire 5 to 10% of their workforce every year through normal attrition. So right there, over say a 5 or 10 year period, you can massively change the corpus of people in your corporation by adopting the hiring principles with which the two of you pioneered, and which are contained in this book and in Laszlo Bock's upcoming book, which is an even more detailed version of all of this. So I think that that's step one. The second is in this book, there are 2 pages which I actually wrote, which are on strategy.
That's the strategy pages. Those
Thank you, and they are whichever pages. But anyway, and the largest companies that I deal with they don't really have coherent 5-year strategies. What happens is they haven't figured out what to do when their model is disrupted. So what's the narrative? Old business, new business. Old media, new media. Old kind of companies, new kind of companies. Change is afoot. Now, if you believe, as I do, that the growth of America, the seed corn of America, are all of these entrepreneurs, then entrepreneurs are the most important thing that we can mint in our country. We should support them and so forth and so on, educate them, et cetera. Then the right answer is, over a 5-year period, each and every company should organize itself around the disruption that they'll face from new entrants. And almost no company can answer that question in a coherent way. Let's use some examples. The obvious one, the Uber versus the taxi industry, is an obvious one. Everyone gets that. What about Tesla? Tesla invented a new way of thinking about a car. What are the existing car companies going to do about it? I can give you example after example.
Yeah, I remember there was a phrase once that someone said, you know, if I had drawn up a 5-year plan, I would have missed every great thing that ever could have happened. Right? There's just sometimes you just can't see far enough ahead
so my point
to
is
actually plan that far.
So my point is that you have to have a vision. So let's have a conversation about our 5-year plan, everyone in this room. What do you think will be true in 5 years? Let's start with smartphones. We're all going to have them. They're all going to be faster. You're still going to sleep with them next to your bed. They're still going to have really powerful apps, and you're going to use them very, very extensively. What's going to happen with the back end? Huge new services of one kind or another, right? The friction of transactions will be much less. You start making those assumptions, right? And then you can begin to say, well, how am I going to do? What's going to happen from my product? How will I make my revenue? And how will I transition to that new model?
Yeah.
Jonathan, do you have thoughts on the sensibility of this?
I think I would sort of shorten what Eric said into culture is very hard to change. If you're a startup and you're on the wrong trajectory with culture, I guess my suggestion would be start over. Everything beyond that in the book, strategy done in a more pliant and fluid way where strategy is the foundation, it's not literally a documented, dictated plan, applies to all of these companies. I think all of the principles in decision making about how to run meetings, how to structure decisions around data, how to eliminate hippos, everything in communication, repetition not spoiling the prayer, sharing everything, and a lot of the principles in innovation, focusing on the user and thinking big, all of those things apply to any company in any industry.
I want to bridge from mistakes to sort of a sense of humor, which is what the next question is about, which I remember. One of the things that Eric asked me to do along the way was he was giving a speech at the NAB, big conference. He was giving the keynote. He needed an opening sizzle reel, and he turned to me and said, "No, Marissa, you're funny. Why don't you create a video sizzle reel for my entrance into the NAB?" And so I was hugely complimented. I went and hired some writers, and we put together a little skit and a video, and I got the video back, and it was awful. Like, so awful, I spent like 2 hours on the phone with Eric's admin talking through how bad it was and how I could tell Eric how bad it was. And I went to Eric and I said, "Eric, it's bad, like it's not usable." And Eric said, oh, it can't possibly be that bad. He watched the video and he said, "Yeah, I can't use this." And I was really grateful as I watched my career and my compliment of being funny flash before my eyes that you had a sense of humor in that moment. How important is a sense of humor as an executive?
You know, there's a simple rule, which is at the end of the day, if people can leave your office smiling just a little bit, you're going to get more work out of them. So it's just human nature that people want to be thanked a little bit, they want to be respected a little bit, and off they go. I'll tell you a story. I don't know if you know this story. We were all over in Building 41 at the time, and there was a review of a proposal that an engineer had to go wire up San Francisco, and we subsequently did it in a different way. And this gentleman was very proud of his proposal. We had a new executive who came in who started asking questions, and this engineer did not know the answer to any single question. And you could watch, right, this engineer who I did not know very well was very proud of their idea. You could watch their mood go from ecstatic to be presenting to this august board, which consists of us, right, to being like about to kill themselves. They were literally just distraught. So the question is, what do you do at that point? And the answer is, you go up to the engineer and you say, "Your idea was brilliant, and I want you to spend some time, and I want you to come back, and I want to tell you how you're going to address it." And if you don't do that, you're not going to get any productivity out of that. That engineer then went back, incorporated all the feedback, and came back with a product that, again, helped make the internet happen.
But what we really do at Google for fun, as you know, with Memogen and these other online things, is we make fun of the most senior people in management. So, Eric, I know you probably like everyone to believe that you learn most of your management techniques from Michael Porter and Peter Drucker and Tom Peters. You just mentioned the "when you leave my office, I want to touch your heart, I want you to smile" rule. Who is the brilliant management writer and personality who you learned that from?
Oprah.
It's true.
Oprah's a very gifted woman, and she explained, for example, that if you want to change human behavior, you have to change people's hearts, not their heads. It's true. We call that in the book the Oprah principle, but it's true. So what's your name?
Avi Goyle.
Okay.
So I want to know how Google is trying to deliver internet coverage to people in remote areas, because I heard about all these Google X projects, and I wanted to know how they're delivering internet coverage to them.
Wow. Could you? Oh no, Jonathan, he has another question.
Oh, hold on. Here comes your mic.
And I also want to know about Google in China. Is Google willing to accept internet censorship to enter China?
Okay, stay right here. I'll answer your question.
See, he can debate right now. You can invoke debate.
Is this my future, the hardest questions for out of the mouth debates? So, well, first place, you understand how balloons work. And we invented a balloon that would sit in the stratosphere and float around.
I think I've heard of that before.
But give him the mic, clip it on him. Yes, so what happened was, the key breakthrough was that we figured out a way to make a transponder on the balloon that could talk to existing smartphones. This had never been done before. I, of course, when it was originally presented, figured it would never work. Well, not only did it work, but it works fabulously. So the people that you're talking about, people in very remote areas, they'll take their normal phone and they'll be able to talk to literally balloons in the sky at 60,000 feet, right? All around the southern and northern hemisphere. It's really, really cool. And by the way, they steer by moving up and down. It's the neatest thing ever. Now, your question about China, ask the question again.
Is Google willing to accept internet censorship to enter China?
Actually, no.
But China has the most people in the But China has the most people in the world. Shouldn't most companies be willing to accept almost any terms to get that market open?
So we debated this a long time, and we talk about this in the book, which you've clearly read.
Actually, I haven't read it.
You've not read it?
Yes, I haven't heard of it until today.
Okay, well, here's my copy. So anyway, what happened in China was that we just decided that the level of censorship was counter to Google's principles. And we decided that we would not operate in China as long as that was part of their plan. It was a historic decision, and a decision that most other companies would not have made.
Oh. Good answer.
Thank you very much, Avi.
And
thank you. Okay, good.
so thank you, Avi.
There you go. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is how Google works. It's a real-life example of inciting debate. It's been such an honor.
So when are you applying to work for us?
Actually, I want to run for U.S. Secretary of State.
He wants to run for U.S. Secretary of State. You heard it here first. Remember him. We're a supporter of you as a politician. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's fantastic.
Google went from internet startup to global juggernaut in less than a decade. There are hundreds of stories like this at the Computer History Museum. Join us next time for the Computer History Museum presents Revolutionaries.